Hello people of the internet, this is Arkivian and I saw Avengers Infinity War a few weeks ago. Now this isn't a review video, but just so you know, I did love the movie, I thought it was really good. But instead I want to focus on a different aspect of the movie. And that aspect is the man with a ballsack for a chin and a penchant for genocide, Thanos. Now the reason I want to talk about Thanos is because I'm trying to decide, is he actually a good bad guy? Now I did enjoy him in the movie, don't get me wrong, but I'm wondering, did I only enjoy him because he actually got to achieve his goal? He actually got there and I was like, god damn, he's gonna click his fingers and he was like, pow, and that was it, half the universe gone. Or is he a good villain for reasons other than the fact that he won? And does it make him any better than the ones that came before? So first off, what happened with Thanos to make him go and do all this crazy stuff? And Thanos' story goes all the way back to his home planet, and according to him, it was a lush place full of awesomeness. The only problem was there were too many people consuming too many resources. So Thanos has an idea on how to deal with the situation.
Okay guys, I've got an idea. How about we kill half the people on the planet? I know that sounds bad, but trust me, we'll keep it random so it's totally fair. Totally fair!
So the other leaders on Thanos' planet basically looked at Thanos and were like, bruv, nah, that's f***ing crazy, bruv. So Thanos then leads them to it, and what ends up happening is what he feared. They overpopulate, consume too many resources, and eventually become extinct. At least that's what he says. So for Thanos, it was a simple calculation, the amount of people versus the amount of resources. But more importantly, what I think is interesting is that he said that he wanted the sacrifices to be random, which shows that he understood why people wouldn't want to do it, because that means saying goodbye to your friends, family and neighbours. And so from Thanos' point of view, he understands why people don't want to make that sacrifice. So Thanos continues that line of reasoning and then applies it to the rest of the universe. And he thinks, if this happened to my planet, of course this is going to happen to every other planet with life on it. And he's the only person in the universe to have this perspective. And so he sees it as a burden that he's going to have to go out into the universe and make that choice for everyone. But in his view, it's for his version of a greater good. It's for their own good. And that's how Thanos reasons it. So Thanos takes that line of thinking and then goes off into the universe and starts applying it to every planet he comes across. And by applying it, I mean killing off half their population. And then at some point along the line, he finds out about the Infinity Stones and realises he can do the same job but just with a click of his fingers. So what does that actually tell us about Thanos though? So Thanos' backstory is actually pretty good, I think, because it helps us speculate on the kind of character he is, like how evil is he and what kind of evil is he. We know he's bad because he suggested genocide before things got really bad, and he's more empowered to commit genocide after things got really bad, and then he goes forward to commit it on a galactic scale. So we know he's bad, but the question is more kind of, what kind of bad is he? Is he kind of a Joffrey petulant child kind of bad? Is it all about his ego? Is everything really about him and he actually doesn't really give a shit? Is he bloodthirsty and finding an excuse to be bloodthirsty? Is he some kind of ideological or religious fanatic and truly believes it? And all of these are kind of on equal footing at the moment when you just look at the backstory and don't really go into too much context.
That's right, I killed that motherfucker!
So let's look at a couple of other aspects of the movie to see if it gives us a little more context as to what kind of character he actually is. So I'm not going to go through every scene of the movie, but I do want to look at the first scene, because it's actually a really good scene for establishing Thanos as a physical threat. And the way they do that is the introduction of Thor. I just have to say this, I love Thor Ragnarok, but the end cutscene where they ended up in front of Thanos, in front of his ship, and I was like, is that Thanos' ship? I'm not sure that's going to end so well, but Thor just went through a whole adventure and got leveled up to like Raiden levels of power. So maybe there's going to be like some awesome fight at the start of the next one between him and Thanos, or maybe Thanos isn't on that ship and maybe he has this awesome fight against the Obsidian Order. I think it's called the Obsidian Order. But that's not what happened. In fact, you don't even get to see what happened. All they want you to know is that Thanos won. Like whatever epic battle happened didn't last very long, was pretty one-sided, and ended with Thanos holding up Thor by his head, having a chat with someone else, Loki at the time. So that's pretty cool. But then just to establish even more that he's a physical threat, Loki has his like sort of one-liner and then says, but we have a Hulk, calling back to the first Avengers movie.
When they come, and they will, they'll come for you. I have an army. We have a Hulk.
Though I did think we did just see Hulk almost lose in a fight against Thor in Thor Ragnarok. The only reason he won is because Thor got electrocuted by the discs in his neck, even though he's the god of lightning, which I thought was a bit odd. So then the Hulk shows up and Thanos beats the green out of him. I mean, literally just beats him back into Banner's body. And Hulk don't even come back for the rest of the movie. That is how bad Thanos beat Hulk. And that's when you realise, okay, Thanos is really physically powerful. Like, I mean, he let himself get beat on by the Hulk before them pounding him into submission. That did not come out the way I meant that to. And another thing Thanos does is he kills Heimdall, which I'm kind of screwing. I really liked Heimdall's character. I wanted him in it more. That being said, his general job was just to perv on everybody else in the universe and occasionally open a door. Oh yeah, and he could stab a spaceship. He could do that too. But he did go out like a boss. He made this sacrifice, called upon his power one more time, and then got Hulk out of there. Now I think that's pretty important because Heimdall made a sacrifice. Like, he gave his life to be able to achieve the goal that he wanted and succeeded. Which, as you can tell through Thanos' backstory, ends up being kind of a running theme throughout the movie. But I thought that was a pretty good way to establish a physical threat, because that means everyone else in the MCU that we know now is already outmatched in a straight up fight. I actually got a bit more out of this scene, and one of those things of what happened with Loki. And it's not his death, though his death was cool, and the whole no more resurrections, and they made it look as final as it could look, and he suffered and everything. And it's like, he's definitely dead. He's definitely dead. I mean, he could come back. But it was the point where Thanos said, give me the stone or I'll kill your brother. And then Loki's like, go ahead, I don't care. And then it turns out really he does care and then eventually gives up the stone. But I think what that was letting you know in the movie, yeah, which I didn't think of like at first, but the second time I was like, oh my god, it's so clear, was basically he's in Thanos' position but on a lower scale. Rather than the whole gauntlet, he's after one gem. It comes with all this power and he's given the choice. Here's that power, now you have to make the sacrifice of your brother. That's the cost. And he can't do it. He doesn't have the will, as Thanos would put it, to go through with it. And then even when he's dying, he says to Thanos, you will never become a god. And Thanos basically sneers at him like it's like he seems to consider Loki as pretty much nothing. And that's because Thanos saw an example of someone not having the will to attain the power they need to get their goal. And that probably reminded him of himself. I thought that was quite interesting. I didn't realise that the first time round. I was just more like, wow, Loki's getting strangled and shit. Oh, cool. Blah, blah. You know, I was kind of like that. And something else about this scene was Ebony Maw. You know those 4 henchmen that Thanos had around him the whole time? Well, they're called the Black Order. And in the movie, they were kind of like mini-bosses for the Avengers to defeat, considering they were going to lose the main end fight. So you needed to have some victories for the heroes. Now, they didn't really have much dialogue. I think most of them had like 1, maybe 2 lines in the whole movie. Except for one, which was Ebony Maw. That seemed to be the one that they emphasised the most. Now, I don't really know Ebony Maw's character really well from the comic books. I mean, from what little I've been told and seen, he basically doesn't really have any powers. He's just really good at convincing people, which I think is kind of cool. That's definitely not the case in this movie, though. But I can see why they wouldn't really do that in this film. I mean, there's already a billion characters. Plus, the movie's trying to get you to know a whole new character, which is Thanos. And then on top of that, it would just take up way too much time in the movie trying to introduce him and have him go around trying to convince people of things. So I have to wonder if that's why they gave him telekinesis powers specifically in the movie. I mean, they literally give him the power to influence physical things around him with his mind. So maybe it's an homage to the role that he played in the comics, so that's why they did his powers in that way. So Ebony Maw is definitely the most emphasised of the mini-bosses, because even when he's in the background of certain scenes, he's constantly preaching and preaching. In fact, he's a bit more like a prior from Stargate, actually. He turns up on the planet, bestows the word, when nobody agrees, he tries to wipe them out. But there's a point where he hands over the Infinity Stone to Thanos. And he doesn't just hand it over, he prostrates himself, he grovels, he's like, oh Lord Thanos, please take this Infinity Stone, I am not worthy to hold it, you are the only one worthy to hold such a powerful item. You're like, oh my god, shut up, Jesus. But the thing is that I found really interesting, is that Thanos didn't tell him to shut up, didn't tell him to be quiet, didn't tell him to stop being ridiculous. He stood there and let him carry on until he was finished, and then took the Infinity Stone, which to me kind of felt like, man, he loves this. He loves this kind of admiration for the role that he's playing. It's someone who's acknowledging the importance of this role that he's given himself. And for me, that seems a bit more like an ego-driven tyrant than someone who really believes the philosophy he says that he believes. So looking at Ebony Maw that way might make you think that he's kind of a fanatic and really believes in Thanos' philosophy. But later on there's that scene where he's torturing Doctor Strange by putting needles in his face. But gradually he realises that he's running out of time. And then he starts to crack and he says how he's never failed Thanos before, but if he does fail even once, there's going to be consequences. The implication is that Thanos will kill him. But if he really believed in his philosophy, he would be fine with it, because it would be the sacrifice being made to better the universe. But he really doesn't want to die. He doesn't mind preaching to everybody else that they're going to die for some kind of greater good. He just doesn't want to be the one to do it. And then that's when you realise just how smarmy he is. And I think that's really important, because Thanos surrounds himself with people like that. I mean, that's one of his main dudes. This sycophant who just seems to love him, or at least play up to loving him in everything that he believes in. And either Thanos is too dumb to notice that he's faking it, or Thanos realises that he's faking it and just likes to hear it a lot. Which, either way, that still leads to him being more of an egotistical kind of tyrant rather than truly believing in his philosophy. So in the Thanos and Gamora flashback scene, it tries to focus mostly on how they interact with each other. Because you see Thanos see baby girl Gamora and he seems to take an interest in her, and he leads her away from the executions, and he tries to explain his philosophy to her to help her understand what's going on, and he even covers her eyes from the actual killing that happens. Now, looking at just those things in that scene, it makes you feel like there's this softer side to the guy that wants to genocide the whole universe. But going by how the camera keeps you focused on those interactions, I think that's what they wanted you to think. They wanted to try and humanize this terrible person. But whilst that's going on, there's a bunch of other stuff going on in the background. And I think all of it together really helps you get a better idea of the kind of bad guy that Thanos is. So in the background, whilst they're having their interactions, guess what's going on? A mass execution of half of everyone. And whilst this execution is being arranged with half the people being separated to one side of the road and the other half to the other side of the road, and Ebony Maw is there yet again preaching Thanos' philosophy. He's all like, oh, half of you will die, will be sacrificed, but don't worry, it's for the greater good of the universe. It may seem bad right now, but it's totally good, really. And that's when you realise Thanos has been going around instilling his philosophy kind of like a crazy religion or a cult. Well, it is effectively a death cult. Now, I think one way to view it is that of course he would do that if he goes to a planet. He's going there to wipe out half the population and then instill his philosophy among whoever's left. Which is why he brings a preacher along and has him telling everybody how good this is while he kills off half of them. Because remember, after he leaves, he wants them to carry on with his philosophy and keep the population down. But I don't think that's just it. I think what it's actually more about is that he needs everybody to see this philosophy, to understand that he's the hero in this philosophy. He's the one who's saving the universe. And he needs people to understand that and to accept that to justify what he's doing. And the reason why I'm leaning more that way regarding Thanos is because of his interactions with Gamora, you know, the main part of that scene. Because he sees her looking distressed at the destruction that he's causing. She asks him where her mother is, and he doesn't even register the question. He just responds with, "What's your name?" He takes her aside and then sits down and tries to explain his philosophy directly to her, whilst keeping her looking away from the sacrifice that he's saying is a good thing. And then right when the sacrifice comes, right after he explains that it's balance, with the preacher in the background saying, "Don't worry, this is good, this is bringing balance to the universe," he shields her view of everybody getting killed. And on one side you could say, well, of course he would, it's a child. I don't think he sees it that way. He's just killed off God knows how many billion children, be it random or not. I think the reason why he hid it from her is because he doesn't want her to see how bad his philosophy is, what it actually means, at least not yet. He needs to convince her over time to believe in his philosophy and see him as the hero. That's what he needs. It's all about him. If it wasn't all about him, he never would have stopped to pay any attention to this girl. She would have been one of another billion Tuesdays. It would have been a fucking Tuesday to him. He would not have given a shit. He would have just chucked her on one side or the other and then just told everyone to fire and moved on with his day. Because that's the whole point of his philosophy. But he chose her, separated her out and kept her alive because he needed her to see him as a hero. Now that's fucking ego. So Gamora's sacrifice, one of the most important scenes in the movie. Not the most important scene. I would say clicking the fingers, that's probably the most important scene. But I reckon it's probably like number 2. The number 2 most important scene in the movie. One of the things I love about this scene is that it uses a mechanic that Marvel have used in other MCU movies. And each time they do it, it just gets better and better. And I don't know if there's some kind of proper film term for what the mechanic is, but I call it the Thor's hammer moment. So what do I mean by Thor's hammer's moment? Well, if you think back to Age of Ultron, other than being a great scene for showing the interactions between the characters, the hammer shows itself to be a gauge of what's worthy and what's not. So for example, you have most of the heroes try to lift it and they can't even budge it. So that's on one end of the scale. On the other end of the scale, you know that Thor can just lift it because the hammer deems him as worthy and good. And somewhere in the middle, when Captain America tries, he actually nudges it, and that worries Thor, so you know that's significant. But putting those things together, it gives you a gauge of how worthy the hammer considers each of them to be to wield it. And so as entertaining as that scene was, it actually set something up that came along later in the movie. Vision born from the conflict of the heroes and the villain. And when Vision picks up that hammer, it lets both the heroes and the viewers know at the same time, so you experience this at the same time as the heroes in the movie, that this guy is basically Cyber Jesus and that you can trust him. And so they can just cut out most of the chit chat and just get right to it. And as the viewer, you feel like that's totally fine, that they can skip over all of that because you're with them too, because the hammer said it was okay. And that whole Thor's hammers moment, that's what happens in Gamora's sacrifice scene. The gem itself plays the same role as Thor's hammer does. The viewers and the characters in the movie believe that the gem somehow knows what's best to attain it. And what we're told is that Thanos needs to sacrifice someone he loves. Now at this point in the movie, I was pretty much in the same point of view as Gamora, where I was like, wow, who's he going to sacrifice? He doesn't love her. He can't sacrifice Gamora. He doesn't really love her. It's really all just about himself. That's where I was when I was watching it. But the gem knows all, and it knows when somebody really does love someone. And so when Thanos starts crying, and I'm like, oh shit, he really does love her. He really does care. And then he throws her off the cliff, and I thought, oh my god, that was awesome. I mean, I didn't want Gamora to die or anything like that, obviously, and arguably she's not really dead. But I was surprised. For me, it hit me in that moment where I was in Gamora's shoes and then got surprised. But then when I thought about it for a moment, I was like, does that really mean that he believes the bullshit that he goes on about? It doesn't. What it actually means is that he does love Gamora, and he's willing to sacrifice her either for his philosophy or for his ego or for both. In the Thanos versus Iron Man scene, when they're having a discussion, Thanos actually seems to offer some kind of respect towards Iron Man. He knows who he is, he knows who Tony Stark is, and Tony Stark is surprised at that as well. But it's interesting because both of them play these kind of father figure roles, in that both of them put themselves in that position. I mean, they both opted for it. So as far as Thanos goes, he sees himself as having to make this decision for everyone else in the universe because he's the only one who can understand the correct perspective and make the sacrifice. From Iron Man's perspective, he's someone who sees himself as having to protect Earth, and he actually did opt for that position. He put himself there. He came out and said he was Iron Man and said he was going to protect everyone, and even made challenges to other villains in previous movies over that. So the ego is definitely there, but here's where the difference comes in, and it makes you take a different look at Civil War actually, and Iron Man's choices. Thanos doesn't give a shit about what anybody else in the universe thinks. He doesn't give a shit about how it affects them. Not really. He says it's going to affect them badly, but he's going to have to do it anyway. But he doesn't care if people have any protests against it, if they have any other ways of dealing with it. At the end of the day, all the harm he causes is justified. In Civil War, even though I wasn't really on Tony Stark's side, when you look at it on this scale, it does show that he cared what everybody else thought. When the rest of the world drew up papers and said, look, we need you to sign this because you are having an impact on the world and we have our sovereignty. He was like, yeah man, that's the point. But at the same time, if you then want to go back to Avengers, Captain America accused Tony Stark of being someone who would never make the absolute sacrifice that was needed. And by the end of Avengers, Tony Stark did. But the core difference there is sacrificing one's own life, not everybody else's. It really does show the difference in how both characters think about other people. As in, Iron Man actually thinks about other people as being able to make a difference in the universe, whereas Thanos doesn't see them as people able to affect the universe in any other way than breeding, because he's the only one who can affect such change on the universe. So given all this I've said about Thanos so far, I just want to compare him to a few other of my favourite MCU villains, and the first one of those is Loki. Now overall, Loki was a pretty pathetic villain, and that's actually why I like him. And what I mean by pathetic, he felt overshadowed by Thor his entire life. He just wanted people to notice him and see him and worship him.
I remember a shadow, living in the shade of your greatness. I remember you tossing me into an abyss. I who was and should be king.
Humans slaughter each other in droves while you idly fret.
I mean to rule them.
But why should I not?
Think yourself above them.
Oh yes.
And that actually makes him a pretty generic villain, The great thing about Loki was that the actor brought so much charisma to him. And there was something else about him before he started taking the journey to become an anti-hero. It was that he still felt sentiment for other people. Yes, he did want everybody to worship him and this, that and the other, but he was more like a really angry, petulant child. There was even that point where Thor tried to reason with him when they were battling at the end on the Avengers Tower, and for a moment he starts to give, but then he goes, sentiment, and then stabs Thor. But the point is, he was actually fighting against sentiment, which meant that he still feels it. He still has the ability to relate to other people on a more equal level. And that ends up being the journey he takes with the rest of the MCU story. He starts making friends and becomes more of an anti-hero. Then there's Killmonger, and he's one of my favourite villains too. He was wronged by Wakanda when he was a kid, he had a really hard life, and then his career seemed to be going around the world killing people. Now some people might argue that he kind of achieved what he wanted because he got some positive change to happen. But no, that's not actually true. He wanted vengeance. He wanted to take the weapons of Wakanda and then go and unleash it on the rest of the world in vengeance for what was done to him and his demographic.
We got spies embedded in every nation on Earth, already in place. I know how colonizers think, so we're gonna use their own strategy against them. We're gonna send vibranium weapons out to our war dogs. They'll arm oppressed people all over the world, so they can finally rise up and kill those in power, and their children, and anyone else who takes their side. It's time they know the truth about us. We're warriors. The world's gonna start over, and this time we're on top. The sun will never set on the Wakandan Empire.
Luckily, you had Black Panther, who's the hero, which is why I like the villain, because it helps define why Black Panther is the hero.
I don't need a suit to kill you. Your reign is over. You sat up here safe and protected.
You want to see us become just like the people you hate so much. Divide and conquer the land state.
Nah, I learned from my enemies. Beat them at their own game.
You have become them. You will destroy the world, Wakanda included.
The world took everything away from me. Everything I ever loved. But I'm gonna make sure we're even. I'm gonna track down anyone who would even think about being loyal to you. And I'm gonna put their ass in the dirt right next to Zuri. Ah!
You see what I'm saying? The dude's lost the plot. But luckily you have Black Panther, and he understands where that anger and rage comes from. He understands what Wakanda should have done in the past and that it should have interceded and tried to help people. And he understands that that's what's got to happen now, but it's a different world now. And so the steps he ends up taking take into account legitimate grievances, but also take into account working with the world at large and not becoming what you hate. And that's why Black Panther is such a badass. Now that might sound like I'm talking down about Killmonger, but not at all. Killmonger was a vessel for hatred, rage and vengeance. He was raw willpower, and that made for an awesome bad guy because it really contrasted against the hero, so you could see why the hero is such a hero. Now I'm not really going to go into Hela because as much as I enjoyed her, she's a pretty basic bad guy. I mean, yes, she was betrayed by Odin, and so she has a reason to be angry at Odin because she helped build Asgard and then they banished her. And then not only did they banish her, they rewrote history so nobody knew about the efforts that she did. Now that does add a layer to her, but really the reason Odin even betrayed her in the first place, she just wanted to conquer everything because she was powerful enough to conquer everything. And the first thing she does when she gets back is try to conquer everything because she has the power to conquer everything. That's pretty much it. She's not really that complicated. She's just a very fun, simple bad guy. But given all that, I don't think she really compares to Loki, Killmonger or Thanos, other than in entertainment value. She was lots of fun. Now when you look at Thanos, Thanos kind of has aspects of all three of these villains. As far as Hela goes, she wanted to correct a narrative that was going on in the universe. He's trying to push a narrative that makes him the savior of the universe by killing off half of the universe. With regards to Killmonger, like Killmonger, he's someone who believes he's the only one with the ability and the will to make something happen. And with regards to Loki, Thanos is actually a lot like Loki in Avengers 1. He needs everyone around him to understand his point of view, to understand that he's the hero in this story. He even says that when he's done, he'll sit down on a hill somewhere and look over a grateful universe. As in, they will understand and be grateful that he killed off half of their population. So now I've taken a closer look at Thanos, I can finally see what it was that was off about it to me and why I had the question of, is he a good bad guy? And it's mainly down to two things. And the first of those things is that he's not actually a new kind of villain in the MCU. Not at all, really. If anything, he's a composite of all the best bits of the villains that came before it. Now, is that a bad thing? No, it's not actually. I think that's actually a good thing. It looks like they had been trial running villains throughout the series, looking at different aspects and seeing what was strong and what wasn't, and then they took what was best and then put it all together in this villain to give us one grand villain at the end of 10 years. And so by doing that, they gave us a villain that was a physical threat to the Avengers from the start of the movie. And the previous 10 years of villains, they were all preparation for building us towards this villain, because they each focused on an aspect separately and then all brought together in Thanos. That's why Thanos beating the Hulk was so important and was such a threat. Because in every movie so far, if everything else goes wrong, the Hulk could be there to bail them out with brute strength. But what Thanos did, he took away what was effectively the Avengers' safety net. And that brings me to the other thing that bothered me about him, and to be honest, it does still bother me about him. And that reason is his entire philosophy. Let's go back to the start. He first proposed his view when his planet was in dire straits, and he was told no by everybody else, and at that time he accepted, and granted he regrets it ever since. What he doesn't go into is why they told him no. Yes, it would be sacrificing all these other people, but also there's actually being able to take other measures to try and deal with the situation. If his problem is that there's too many people, how about introduce some sex education and environmental awareness into society? That might be a good idea. In real life, now, we have countries that now have a negative growth rate, so why they couldn't do that, I don't know. But for whatever reason, they couldn't do that. They didn't think to do that, or they couldn't apply it. And you can imagine all kinds of context for why they wanted to keep breeding like rabbits, regardless of their situation. But at the end of the day, whatever the reason was, it ended their civilization. They basically failed at existing. That's what happened. And you know what? Thanos can't take that. He can't take that they just failed. So he has to come to the conclusion that if his planet failed, every other planet in the universe is going to fail in the same way and not find solutions for the problems that his planet had. And everything else is based off that kind of reasoning. That's why he builds a kind of cult or religion when he goes everywhere. That's why he tries to convince everybody of his reasoning, because he knows his reasoning doesn't make sense the second you start considering other people as having their own agency. As he even says, it's a simple calculation. The reason why it's simple is because it's dumb, to be honest. He has to remove the context of everything else in the universe and equate it down to resources and people, as if nothing else in the universe exists, including the people's will and ability to evolve and adapt to their surroundings. But it's all about self-aggrandizement, because he couldn't take that his species failed. You know, his entire planet failed. They couldn't adapt. And there are a billion other planets in the universe, and half of them aren't going to adapt either, and they're going to fail too, because the universe doesn't care. The universe doesn't care about him, doesn't care about his planet, and he can't take that. He needs it to care. He needs the whole universe to care about him, and that's why he's gone off on this entire thing. Now, do his stupid motives take away from him as a character? Actually, it doesn't. I may not like the motives that he's going for. I wish they could have done something different. But we see that kind of thinking every day in real life, in all facets of life. So it's not unrealistic for somebody to go that far, especially if they also happen to have the power to constantly reinforce their perspective. And he's going for the ability to literally bend reality to his perspective. So he's doing it to the nth degree. However, what I would have liked is if he had motives that couldn't be just disproven through a little bit of critical thinking. Now, in one sense, I like that they took his character that way, because it doesn't matter the religion or ideology. If you start at absurd, you can only ever get more absurd, and that's exactly what Thanos does. The core difference is that Thanos happens to have a gauntlet that can affect the entire universe. Okay, now there's two things that have occurred to me during all this, and one of them is, do you think Thanos killed his own planet? He said he just let it be and then they just ran themselves to extinction. But did he just sit idly by? How comes he's the only one left? When they went through starvation and war, I mean, he sort of hinted towards that's what happened. Did he sit by, or did at some point did he go, no, this isn't actually working, whatever it was they were trying, I'm going to try and kill off half the population? Maybe he's the reason why they ended up finishing themselves off. I mean, they had spaceships, they could have left and tried to re-establish somewhere else, maybe. But he doesn't go into any of that, and it leaves a lot to speculation. And the other theory I have is that Thanos isn't the most evil bad guy in this movie. I think the actual most evil bad guy in this movie is actually Red Skull. And the reason why I say that is because I don't think Thanos had to sacrifice someone he loved. I think Red Skull has been there for like 80 years, bored out of his skull. So what does he do when Thanos gets there? He fucks with him. That's pretty much what he does. He's just like, yeah man, you gotta give up something you love. And that's pretty much it. Thanos never really had to do a sacrifice. Red Skull was just messing with him. I'm just putting it out there, that's all. So anyway guys, that's my general thoughts on Thanos, and when I looked at him, what I got back from it. Do you guys agree or disagree, or do you have any things that I missed out that might change my view of him or anything like that. Let me know in the comments if you like this, and thanks for taking the time to listen. I'll catch you guys next time.